everyone. Welcome to the San Juan Islands Community Network. And hello, Brent. Welcome to SJICN.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you. Brent Lyles will be discussing the San Juan County Comprehensive Plan, known as the Comp Plan, and the update process it's currently undergoing. Brent is the executive director of Friends of the San Juans, formed by a citizen group in 1979. Their first major effort was helping the county adopt its first comprehensive land use plan. Friends uses science to inform decisions that conserve the county's environment and economy. Just recently, Western Washington University's Salish Sea Institute in Bellingham published their State of the Salish Sea report. It highlights that ecosystem decline has outpaced restoration and protection. The report concluded with a quote, "Science gives us knowing, but caring comes from someplace else." And this really underpins a critical component of planning and management. Today, Brent will talk about the comp plan itself and why Friends is engaged in its updating. This will be the first of two segments. Next time, he'll break down ways that everyone can provide their own input to the county government and scheduling of the process. Thanks for being here, Brent.
Well, thank you so much. That was a terrific introduction. Let me start, if I may, by acknowledging and honoring that this beautiful place we call home is comprised of the ancestral lands and waters and natural resources of the Coast Salish peoples, and that the Coast Salish peoples have cared for and stewarded the San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea since time immemorial and continue to do so. And we at Friends honor their inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation. You know, that element of stewardship is why we're here. The comprehensive plan is so important for our county and in helping us make sure that we are stewarding what we have.
What really set the comp plan into existence in the first place? And tell us why it's so important. What's at stake with the comp plan?
Yeah, thank you. So starting with Comp Plan 101. So the comprehensive plan is a document, and it is created by San Juan County to help guide development and help guide growth for the next 20 years. In the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of population growth in the state of Washington. And some very forward-thinking progressive people said, we should be talking about this and we should be making decisions about the long-term impacts of that growth in a deliberate way and in a thoughtful way. And so state legislation was put in place to create this local comprehensive planning process, right? That the state wanted local decision makers to be thinking about growth where they are, right? Because growth here in the San Juan Islands is really different from growth in Seattle or growth in Bellingham. It looks different here. And so that's the value of having that comprehensive planning process be local. And that was, like I say, late 70s. And again, that's where Friends came into being, right? Was to help our county put some of this thoughtful planning in place. Today, our planning process is governed, as I say, by that Growth Management Act. And that's the state law that kind of dictates the process of that comprehensive plan update. Since that time, since that first comp plan, the county's comp plan gets updated periodically, and we are in the middle of doing that right now. Now, what the comprehensive plan does is it sets out a series of goals and policies for the county that are on a lot of different topics: energy and transportation and housing and land use. One of your questions was, what's at stake? And if you think of this in terms of planning for the next 20 years, and you think about that in the context of this really explosive development that we're seeing right now in the islands, and you think about that in the context of climate change, what happens over the next 20 years is critical. And for me, I feel, what's at stake is nothing less than the future of the rural character of our community and the future of the integrity and health of the natural resources that we have here. So everything is at stake. This is really, really important. And I really appreciate this opportunity for me to talk about this because a lot of people aren't aware that this is happening, and the ones that are aware and the ones that really are excited about engaging in this may not know how, because it is challenging and it's a county process that's fairly complicated. So I'm pleased to be here for a few minutes to talk about what the comp plan is, why it's important, and then to have that part two of how people can get engaged with it.
Is there an example of how the comp plan is implemented, and how is it connected to the real world in ways that make sense to the public?
The comp plan starts with a vision for what our community wants to be and how it wants to, live its life, basically, right? In terms of its community and, like I say, housing and transportation and natural resources and land use and all of that stuff. And then it creates a set of goals and policies that are very specific for each area. And then what happens after that is that those goals and policies get translated by county staff into the actual code, into the actual regulations that are the rules that we have to follow. So your question is about an example. So here's an example. The comp plan might have a goal within agriculture that is, we want to encourage sustainable regenerative agriculture in San Juan County. So that might be a goal that would appear in the comp plan. If the Planning Commission recommends to County Council that be included in the comp plan, and the County Council agrees, then a regulation or a rule or a piece of code gets created to kind of actualize that in the real world.
Does that mean that we can't really create codes and regulations if they're not in keeping with what the comp plan says we can do? Are they rooted back to the comp plan?
Many are, right? And there are certainly codes that are more strongly correlated to what's in the comp plan. Yeah. And so, but that's the purpose of the comp plan, right? Is to create this framework for codes and rules and regulations that then can be followed and, put in place. And then it has to get followed up with enforcement as well.
What are the key elements of the comp plan? If we had a map to kind of simplify it so we could maybe envision how it's comprised. And somewhere in there, I'm also kind of wondering, is there a section for the environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've already mentioned some of them, right? There is housing, transportation, and land use, and these different pieces get broken down. And as our county moves through this process of the comp plan update, each one of those pieces gets considered in turn, right? So the goals and policies under transportation will be considered. The goals and policies under housing will be considered and kind of argued about and discussed, and pros and cons of this policy or that policy. And that's the opportunity to weigh in, right? That's where the citizens can speak up and say, hey, we feel like XYZ is important as those conversations are happening. One of your questions was about the environment. And for the first time, actually, the comp plan update or the proposed language in that comp plan will include a section on climate. And to their credit, the county staff has drafted some very progressive and forward-thinking kind of draft language for that climate section. And it includes things like regenerative agriculture in it. There's also a suggestion for doing a climate impact study where the county would look at different facets of our community and figure out what will the impacts of climate change be for agriculture, transportation, energy, and so on. But I should add also that climate enters into the comp plan all the way through, right? As an example, land use is a big chunk of the comp plan, and that's something that Friends of the San Juans has been very engaged in. And as one specific example, we have different zoning, different designations in our county for parcels of land. So there's things like rural general use or rural farm forest. And there's a designation called natural resource lands. There's agricultural resource lands and forest resource lands. And those designations are really strongly protected. How does that forest resource land relate to climate? Now, this is not the climate section, right? This is the land use section of the comp plan. Why are forest lands important? Carbon sequestration, aquifer recharge, air quality, water quality, like all of these are climate related goals and values that we as a community have. So Friends of the San Juans has been very vocal and very active in protecting lands that are currently designated as forest resource lands and making sure that the comp plan continues those protections into the future.
How is Friends of the San Juans engaged with this update process? What are the issues that you guys are concerned about? What's the gamut?
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple things for us, right? One is natural resources, the health of habitats, right? Both on land, nearshore environments, and the sea. We want to make sure that there is equity in our community. And so we might weigh in on some of the housing issues. We might weigh in on land use issues with that frame of reference. I mean, everything, even vacation rentals come up in the comp plan. And so we might weigh in on that as well. And as we look into the future, and again, this is in the context of explosive development and in the context of this coming tidal wave of climate change, how can we be really smart and thoughtful and intentional about our land use as we move into the future so that we are ready for climate change, right? So that we have a resilient community and a resilient landscape. Changes are going to happen, but there are things we can be doing now to get ready for that. Something that is really important to the members of Friends of the San Juans, in addition to that protection of natural resources, is the rural character of the islands. And right now, you can drive down a lot of the roads in our county and see forests, right? And see open spaces and see farmlands. And you're not seeing this intense kind of suburban looking development. Now, some places that is happening. And it's not that Friends is against the growth, but we want to make sure that 20 years from now, 7 generations from now, the people that are living here can still experience those things and can still experience that rural character, right? So what can we do now within this comp plan update process to protect that and to make sure that those values will carry forward in how we're managing our county and managing our county's growth?
Can you explain the actual process behind updating the comp plan, what's been going on, and the individual components that are involved with that?
The update process is guided by state legislation called the Growth Management Act. And so the Growth Management Act provides this structure for a local county's comprehensive plan to get updated periodically. And there are different entities involved. One of those entities is the county staff. Another entity is the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission is a group of volunteers from the community that consider the pieces of the comp plan as the comp plan process progresses. And I got to tell you, the Planning Commission are just like my heroes because there's so much work in this. There's so much reading. And I mean, just to be able to do that as a volunteer, I just have so much admiration for that. Anyway, so County Staff Planning Commission, community members, right? We have an opportunity to weigh in. And that might include someone from an organization like me, or it might be just a regular person on the street. And then the county council. And so the idea is that the Growth Management Act instructs county staff to take the previous comp plan and suggest some new language. Are there new things that that have changed that could impact how we manage growth and how we manage land use and how we manage transportation and so on? And these suggested changes then get considered by the Planning Commission. And so at every monthly Planning Commission meeting, they've got their list of topics that they're considering that month. And that's where community input comes. So at the beginning of every Planning Commission meeting, there's a public access time. And I'm typically there every month making a statement about, hey, here's the stuff that's before you, planning commissioners, and here's what I think about that. Here's, I'm bringing this value of environmental stewardship to the conversation, and here's how that plays out with the decisions that are before you today. And any community member can do that. And in addition to showing up in person, you can also write in comments. And so then the Planning Commission takes all of this stuff, right? Like they take the draft language that county staff has developed, and the Planning Commission's role is to bring these bigger community values to the conversation, right? The county staff's role is very specific, guided by that Growth Management Act. The Planning Commission is where the interpretation and kind of the bigger picture comes into it. And they need to hear from the community. So that community input is really, really important. At the end of each meeting, the idea would be that the planning commissioners make decisions, and then those decisions go to the county council as recommendations. And when that happens, when the county council sits down and says, okay, well, now we've got the planning commission's recommendations, there's another opportunity for the community members to show up. Just like at any county council meeting, there's the public access time at the meeting, and you show up and you can send in written comments or you can speak. And that public engagement is so, so important in the process. But the county council makes the final decisions about those pieces of the comp plan.
So after all of that process and the input and siphoning it down from the Growth Management Act and so on, it can end up with the county council, and they can veto if they want.
Technically, yes, the county council could decide to throw everything out that they've just heard, right? But the reality is that the process is there to help the county council members make good decisions, right? They've got a lot on their plate, not just the comp plan, but everything else that the county council looks at. And so when they receive those recommendations from the Planning Commission, and they know that the Planning Commission has gone through this very, elaborate process of deliberation and so on, and considered the science and all of this stuff, that the county council takes that really seriously, and that's the biggest part of their decision-making process is, how have these decisions been made, and recognizing and kind of valuing that.
It seems like a very good opportunity for individuals in the public to foster a dialogue with their elected people. It's like a midterm relationship.
Absolutely. And sometimes I wish that those planning commissioners were just planning commission meetings were just sort of an open dialogue the whole time, because that would be, really valuable. But certainly, there are opportunities when public access happens and you stand up and you talk for 3 minutes, there's that opportunity to prompt the discussion, right? And to ask a question and say, hey, have you all considered this? Have you considered that? And then the planning commissioners can respond to that during their deliberations and during their meeting.
How about a little teaser for what people can expect in our next segment?
As I've said, it is a complicated process, and I'm excited to have another segment here where we can really share some tips and tricks for getting engaged. As I mentioned earlier, people can write in comments to the Planning Commission or the County Council. They can show up to speak at those meetings in person. And there's ways to do that well, ways to do that effectively. I've been learning this over the last 9 months or so, and I've gotten some great advice. And so in our next segment, I'll be sharing some of that advice on how to engage effectively. People want to understand what it looks like so it's not quite so intimidating. What is that process? But then also, how can I make sure that I'm engaging in an effective way? I want to make sure that when I stand up and say something that it's going to be heard. And there's some good advice that I can share on how to do that well.
Very cool. I really appreciate you bringing this into the minds of the people.
Thank you so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I'm not doing this alone, right? I have our members to thank and our board to thank and our terrific staff who have so much experience with the comp plan update process. And it's been great. It's been great education about our community. And it's fun. It's, I definitely kind of geek out about the minutia of some of this stuff. So it's been a fun process for me.
Thanks, Brent. We will see everybody on the next segment. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate it.